Clean yourself up and get back to work, my boss hissed as her coffee dripped down my new dress, her voice loud enough for everyone at the company party to hear. This is why we don't invite assistants to these events. I looked to my mentor, Nathan, the man who had personally recommended me for this position, the one person who could have spoken up. But he just stared at his glass, pretending not to see. The room blurred as I walked out, dignity in tatters but something else taking. Root, determination. What I discovered when I returned to my desk would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire company. The Westbrook Media Annual Client Appreciation Gala was supposed to be my moment to shine, or at least to finally be seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. After 11 months of working tirelessly as an executive assistant at one of Chicago's most prestigious advertising agencies, I had earned my invitation through merit, not charity. At least that's what I believed when Nathan Palmer, the company's creative director and my direct supervisor, had handed me the embossed invitation card 3 weeks earlier. "You've earned this, Emma," he'd said with that mentorly smile that had made me trust him from my first day. "The Ellison campaign wouldn't have landed without your research. The clients should meet the brain behind those demographics." I had spent 2 paychecks on the perfect dress, midnight blue with a modest neckline, but a silhouette that made me feel confident, professional, and perhaps for the first time since joining Westbrook, like I truly belonged. The luxury hotel, ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, only amplified that feeling as I stepped through the doors, invitation clutched perhaps too tightly in my hand. The room hummed with the kind of energy only success and money can generate. Creative directors mingled with tech entrepreneurs. Account executives laughed with clients whose annual marketing budgets exceeded the GDP of small nations. I recognized faces from magazine covers and industry publications, people whose careers I had studied and admired from afar. Now we were breathing the same air, occupying the same space, though the invisible lines of hierarchy remained firmly drawn. I spotted Nathan across the room, engaged in animated conversation with Diane Westbrook herself, the agency's founder and CEO. She was exactly as intimidating in person as her reputation suggested. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored white suit that somehow didn't show a single wrinkle, her silver bob cut with precision that matched her famously exacting standards. I had only encountered her 3 times in my months at the company, brief moments in elevators or hallways where her eyes had slid over me with the practiced indifference of someone who doesn't register people below a certain rank. First time at the big event? I turned to find Raj from the design team beside me, offering a flute of champagne which I gratefully accepted. "That obvious?" I asked, taking a sip to calm my nerves. "Everyone remembers their first Westbrook Gala," he said with a knowing smile. "Word of advice, stick to the edges for the first hour. Diane does her rounds counterclockwise. By the time she reaches this section, she'll have had enough champagne to actually remember your name if Nathan introduces you." I laughed, grateful for the insider intelligence. "Speaking from experience?" 3 years of it, he confirmed. Took me that long to get invited, and another year before she stopped calling me the Photoshop guy. His smile faltered slightly. "Just be careful around her tonight. The Ellison loss has her on edge." "Loss?" I frowned. "But we landed Ellison. The contracts were signed last week." Raj's expression shifted to something unreadable. "Right, of course. Forget I said anything. Too much champagne already." He excused himself quickly, disappearing into the crowd before I could question him further. His warning left me unsettled, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed to circulate, to make the most of this rare opportunity to be visible. I spent the next hour doing exactly as Raj had suggested, moving along the edges of the room, engaging in brief conversations with colleagues I rarely saw outside of video calls, collecting business cards from potential contacts, and mentally filing away snippets of information that might prove useful in my role. I was reaching for a water at the refreshment table when I felt a presence beside me, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that happens when someone important enters your orbit. I turned to find Diane Westbrook herself, reaching for a coffee from the silver service. "You're Palmer's assistant," she said. Not a question, but not exactly an acknowledgement either. "Yes, Ms. Westbrook. Emma Harlow." I extended my hand, which she regarded for a moment before taking it in a brief, firm handshake. "I've been working on the Ellison account with Nathan." Something flickered in her eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or something sharper. "Ah, the demographic research. Yes, I compiled the—" "I'm familiar with your contribution," she cut me off, her tone making it clear that contribution might be an overstatement. "Tell me, Ms. Harlow, do you believe the Ellison campaign is sustainable long-term?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't what I expected from a first real conversation with the CEO, especially not at what was essentially a celebration of that very campaign. "I believe it's aligned with their core values and target demographics," I answered carefully. "The initial metrics show strong engagement, though I'd recommend a reassessment at the 3-month mark to adjust for—" "Core values," she repeated, something like amusement coloring her voice. Interesting perspective from someone who's only seen the surface-level briefs. Before I could respond, Nathan appeared beside us, his timing seemingly miraculous. "Diane, I see you've met our secret weapon," he said smoothly, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt both protective and restraining. "We were just discussing the Ellison campaign," Diane replied, her eyes never leaving my face. "Your assistant has some optimistic views on its longevity." Nathan's hand tightened slightly on my shoulder. "Emma has been invaluable to the team," he said, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone navigating a minefield. "In fact, the client specifically mentioned her research during the final presentation. Is that so?" Diane's expression remained unreadable as she raised her coffee cup to her lips. "Well then, we should all be grateful for such dedicated support staff." It was the dismissal in her tone that made me straighten my spine, a reflexive response to being reduced to support staff after months of working far beyond my job description. I took a half step forward, intent on politely but firmly highlighting my actual contributions, when disaster struck. My movement disturbed Nathan's arm as he was reaching for his own drink, causing him to bump into Diane just as she was lowering her coffee cup. The collision wasn't dramatic, merely a slight jostling, but it was enough. Coffee splashed over the rim of her cup, spattering across the pristine white of her suit jacket and cascading onto my dress in dark rivulets. Time seemed to slow as I watched the stain spread across the fabric I had so carefully selected, the material I couldn't really afford but had purchased anyway, because I wanted to belong in this room, with these people. The immediate gasps from nearby attendees brought time crashing back to normal speed. "I'm so sorry," I began, already reaching for napkins from the table. "Let me help." "Don't touch me." Diane's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade, sharp and cold and precise. She set down her cup with deliberate control, eyes never leaving mine as she did. The surrounding conversations had ceased entirely, creating a pocket of silence that seemed to expand around us. "Ms. Westbrook, it was an accident," I tried again, aware of how many eyes were now fixed on this unfolding scene. "Clean yourself. Up and get back to work," she said, her voice pitched perfectly to carry to the farthest corners of the suddenly quiet room. "This is why we don't invite assistants to these events." The words landed like physical blows, each one precisely targeted to maximize humiliation. I stood frozen, napkins clutched uselessly in my hand, as I watched her brush ineffectually at her ruined jacket. "Someone get me a towel," she commanded, and instantly 2 servers materialized with cloths. No one moved to help me. No one even looked at me directly anymore. their gazes sliding past as if I had become invisible, or worse, an embarrassment they didn't want to acknowledge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I turned to Nathan, certain that he would step in, say something to diffuse the situation, or at least acknowledge that the spill had been an accident caused by multiple factors, not some act of incompetence on my part. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw something like regret flash across his face. "Nathan," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. "Say something." He glanced at Diane, who was now being escorted toward the restrooms by her assistant, then back at me. He took a small step back, creating distance between us that felt vastly larger than the physical space. "You should probably clean up," he said, his voice lowered but still audible to those nearby. "We can discuss this on Monday." "Discuss what?" I pressed, disbelief making my voice sharper than intended. "That I was publicly humiliated for an accident?" His expression hardened slightly, professionalism sliding into place like a mask. "Emma, this isn't the time or place. These events are important for client relationships. Just take care of your dress and we'll sort everything out later." With that, he turned away, immediately engaging the nearest client in conversation. As if nothing had happened, as if I weren't standing there with coffee soaking through expensive fabric and dignity in tatters. I made my way to the restroom in a daze, conscious of whispers that followed me, the quick glances and quicker aversions of eyes. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, I assessed the damage. The dress was ruined, the stain too dark and widespread to be masked. But it was my reflection that truly startled me. Flushed cheeks, eyes bright with unshed tears, but something else too, something harder and colder taking shape beneath the embarrassment. I had worked 14-hour days for this company. I had sacrificed weekends, relationships, even my graduate studies to prove myself valuable. I had believed Nathan when he said talent would be recognized regardless of title or position. I had believed in meritocracy, in fairness, in the idea that hard work would eventually overcome prejudice and hierarchy. How naive I had been, as I dabbed uselessly at my dress. A text message illuminated my phone screen. From Nathan. "Think it's best if you call it a night. We'll regroup Monday. Don't worry about this. Water under the bridge." Water under the bridge. As if my public humiliation was a minor inconvenience, something to be dismissed and forgotten by Monday morning. As if I should be grateful for the permission to slink away without further consequence. I stared at my reflection again, watching, as something shifted in my expression. The hurt calcifying into resolve, embarrassment hardening into determination. I would not cry in this bathroom. I would not give them the satisfaction of breaking me. Instead, I dried my hands, straightened my spine, and made a decision. I would return to the office and collect my things. Not to resign. That would be too easy, too expected. No, I needed to regroup, to think clearly away from the suffocating atmosphere of false sympathy and real judgment. What I couldn't know as I left the hotel, head held high despite the stained dress and wounded pride, was that this humiliation was about to set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just my career, but the entire power structure of Westbrook Media. And it would begin with what I was about to discover when I returned to my eerily quiet office that night. The Westbrook Media building stood eerily quiet when I arrived, a stark contrast to its usual daytime bustle. The security guard barely glanced at my stained dress as I swiped my key card, offering only a perfunctory nod as I passed. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt interminable, each floor's soft chime marking the ascent toward a decision point I couldn't yet fully articulate. Our office occupied the entire floor, open concept with glass-walled conference rooms and executive offices lining the perimeter. During business hours, it hummed with creative energy, but at night it transformed into something almost reverent. the skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights replacing the harsh fluorescence that normally illuminated our workspace. I made my way to my desk, located just outside Nathan's office, close enough for convenience but positioned so that visitors would encounter me first, a human buffer between the creative director and unwanted interruptions. The irony wasn't lost on me as I slumped into my ergonomic chair, still in my ruined dress, coffee stain now dried to an ugly brown bloom across the fabric. What exactly had I expected from Nathan? This question circled my thoughts as I mechanically gathered personal items from my desk. A framed photo of my sister's graduation, a potted succulent that had somehow survived months of irregular watering, a mug from my previous job that read, "Actually, I can." Had I truly believed he would stand up to Diane Westbrook, the company's founder and CEO, over something as seemingly trivial as a coffee spill? Yes. The realization landed with unexpected weight. I had expected exactly that. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not career suicide, but something, anything, that acknowledged my humanity, my dignity, my value beyond my job title. I opened my laptop, intending to download personal files before the weekend, when a notification caught my attention. A new shared folder had appeared in my company drive, titled simply, Ellison Revised. I frowned, clicking it open. Nathan hadn't mentioned any revisions to the Ellison campaign, our biggest account and the very reason I'd been invited to tonight's event. The folder contained dozens of files, spreadsheets, presentation decks, creative briefs, and most curiously, a subfolder labeled Original Metrics that didn't follow our normal naming conventions. I opened it, curiosity momentarily displacing my hurt feelings. What I found made no sense at first. 2 sets of research data on the same campaign, with dramatically different projections. 1. The version I recognized, the one I had helped compile, showed strong initial engagement rates and promising long-term sustainability metrics. The other showed dismal 6-month projections, indicating the campaign would lose effectiveness rapidly after launch. I checked the metadata. My version had been created first. The pessimistic version had been created 3 weeks later, directly, before the final client presentation that Nathan had handled personally. "This can't be right," I murmured to the empty office, scrolling through more files. An email thread caught my eye. Forwarded messages between Nathan and Diane, with the subject line, Ellison Pivot Strategy. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. What I read turned my confusion to shock, then rapidly to a cold, clarifying anger. Nathan, attached revised projections for Ellison. Use these for the board presentation Friday. Original numbers don't support our acquisition strategy. DW Nathan's response, Diane. These numbers are significantly different from Emma's research. The team will notice the discrepancy. NP. Her reply came just 20 minutes later. The team doesn't need to see these, board presentation only. We need to show Ellison underperforming by Q3 to justify the recommendation to merge with Brightline. Digital in Q4. Keep Emma focused on implementation, not strategy. DW. His final response. Understood. I'll handle the presentation personally. NP. My hands had gone numb on the keyboard. Brightline Digital was Ellison's direct competitor. A merger, or more accurately, an acquisition, would effectively dissolve the smaller Ellison brand into Brightline's larger market presence. And Westbrook Media was orchestrating it by deliberately tanking a campaign they'd sold to Ellison as revolutionary. I sat back, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal, manipulating a client into a vulnerable position to force a merger that would ultimately benefit Westbrook's bottom line through increased billings with the larger conglomerate. And Nathan had known. My mentor, the person who had recruited me from my previous job with promises of meritocracy and ethical creative practices, had knowingly used my research as a baseline and then twisted, it to support this scheme. Worse, he had kept me in the dark while using my work to build the foundation of this deception. Those late nights I'd spent analyzing consumer behavior patterns, the weekends sacrificed to perfect the demographic targeting strategy, all of it had been used not to help our clients succeed, but to set them up for failure and acquisition. Raj's strange comment at the party suddenly made sense. The Ellison loss has her on edge. He knew. Perhaps not the whole scheme, but enough to recognize that the campaign was designed to fail. How many others were aware? How deep did this deception go? I copied the entire folder to my personal drive, hands trembling slightly as I worked. This wasn't just about a coffee stain anymore, or even about Nathan's betrayal in that moment of public humiliation. This was about systematic deception, about using people, both clients and employees, as pawns in a corporate chess game I hadn't even known I was playing. As I continued digging through files, more revelations emerged. This wasn't the first. Time Westbrook had employed this strategy. 3 previous accounts had followed similar patterns, promising initial campaigns, mysteriously underperforming metrics, and eventual mergers or acquisitions that benefited larger entities with ties to Westbrook's parent company. The Ellison account was simply the latest target, and I had unwittingly provided the ammunition. My phone buzzed with a text from Raj. "You okay? That was brutal back there." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Was he checking on me? Out of genuine concern or monitoring damage control? How could I know who to trust when the person I'd trusted most had orchestrated this elaborate deception? Another text arrived, this one from Nathan. "Heading home. Everything okay?" My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could confront him now, demand explanations, but instinct told me to wait. Knowledge was power, and right now, I possessed knowledge that neither Nathan nor Diane realized I had. Once I revealed that, the dynamic would shift irrevocably. Instead, I typed, "Fine, just collecting some things from my desk. See you Monday." His response came quickly. "That's the spirit. This will blow over, promise." The casual dismissal in those words, "blow over," ignited something in me that transcended anger. This calculated betrayal of both professional ethics and personal trust couldn't simply blow over. It required a response, one that matched the deliberate nature of their actions. I gathered my things, including a flash drive now containing copies of the incriminating files, and took one last look around the darkened office. The space felt different now, as if the physical environment itself had been complicit in the deception. The sleek modern furniture, the inspiring quotes stenciled on exposed brick walls, the carefully curated artwork celebrating creativity and innovation, all of it seemed hollow, a stage set designed to mask the ruthless calculations happening behind closed doors. The security guard barely looked up as I left the building, giving no indication that he noticed the transformation that had occurred since I entered. But something fundamental had shifted. I stepped onto the sidewalk not as the eager, trusting assistant who had spent beyond her means on a dress to impress people who saw her as disposable, but as someone with clear eyes and a clarifying purpose. The disillusionment was complete. The myths I had believed about meritocracy, about loyalty, about professional ethics, all shattered beyond repair. Nathan wasn't a mentor, but a manipulator. Diane wasn't a demanding but fair leader, but a calculating strategist willing to sacrifice clients and employees alike. Westbrook Media wasn't an ethical creative powerhouse, but a machine designed to extract value without creating it. As I hailed a cab, I made a decision. I wouldn't resign in a blaze of righteous indignation. I wouldn't confront Nathan with what I knew, demanding explanations that would inevitably come packaged in rationalizations about business realities and market forces. I wouldn't even go to Ellison directly, though part of me burned to warn them of what was coming. No, this situation called for something more measured, more strategic, an approach that matched the calculated nature of the deception itself. They had played a long game with people's livelihoods and reputations. I would need to be equally patient, equally strategic. The cab pulled away from the curb, carrying me toward my apartment and away from the building that had housed so many of my professional hopes and aspirations. But unlike when I had left the gala earlier that evening, I didn't feel defeated. The humiliation had crystallized into something harder, something with edges sharp enough to cut through the comfortable falsehoods I had accepted for too long. Tomorrow would bring clarity and planning. Tonight, I would sit with this new reality, this disillusionment that felt strangely like awakening. The myths had crumbled, but in their place stood something more valuable: truth and the freedom that comes with seeing things as they truly are. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in my apartment, the events of the evening replaying in endless variations. The coffee spill, Diane's cutting words, Nathan's betrayal, both in the moment and, I now knew, over months of calculated deception. My mind cycled through these scenes until they blurred together into a singular tapestry of humiliation and revelation. When dawn finally crept through my blinds, I rose exhausted but paradoxically energized. I made coffee mechanically, then caught myself staring at the dark liquid in my mug, remembering how it had looked spreading across Diane's pristine white suit, across my carefully chosen dress. Such a small thing to trigger such momentous consequences. I pulled out my laptop and inserted the flash drive containing the copied files. Part of me still hoped I'd misunderstood, that there was some benign explanation for the contradictory data and damning emails. But morning light brought no alternative interpretations. If anything, with fatigue-stripped defenses, the reality hit even harder. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa, my roommate from college who now worked at a competing agency. Heard about the Westbrook Gala disaster. You okay? Want to grab brunch and decompress? News traveled fast in our industry. I wondered what version of events she'd heard, how I was being portrayed in the retelling. The incompetent assistant who couldn't navigate a cocktail party? The diversity hire who couldn't handle the pressure? I'd heard the whispers before about others who had fallen from favor at prestigious agencies. Can't today, I texted back. Deadlines. Rain check? I couldn't face questions yet, couldn't craft a version of events that wouldn't reveal too much while still preserving my dignity. More importantly, I couldn't risk letting slip what I'd discovered before I'd decided what to do with the information. Instead, I spent the morning researching corporate whistleblower protections, SEC regulations regarding market manipulation, FTC guidelines on deceptive advertising practices, contract law as it pertained to agency-client relationships. I filled a notebook with citations, frameworks, potential approaches. By midday, my analytical mind had constructed a reasonably comprehensive understanding of the legal landscape. But the emotional terrain remained treacherous, unexplored. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself to feel. The anger came first, a white-hot rage that made my hands tremble. I had trusted Nathan completely. When he'd recruited me from my previous position, I'd believed his enthusiastic assessment of my potential, his promises about Westbrook's meritocratic culture. I'd defended him to friends who warned about cutthroat agency environments, insisted he was different, that he valued substance over style, ethics over expedience. What a fool I'd been. The recognition of my own naivety triggered a wave of shame so intense it left me breathless. All those extra hours, the personal sacrifices, the eager puppy routine, rushing to satisfy his every request, anticipating needs, before they were voiced, treating his professional approval as the ultimate validation. I had surrendered my power so completely, and for what? For the occasional good job and the promise of advancement that had likely never been genuine. The shame transmuted quickly to self-directed anger. Why hadn't I questioned things sooner? The inconsistencies had been there. Projects I wasn't allowed to see through to completion, client meetings I was mysteriously excluded from at the last minute, data that disappeared into presentations I never saw in final form. I had rationalized each instance, created explanations that preserved my belief in the system, in Nathan, in my own judgment. I threw my coffee mug into the sink where it shattered satisfyingly, the crash echoing off the apartment walls. "Damn it!" I shouted to the empty room, the release of vocalized anger momentarily cathartic. My phone buzzed again, another text. From Nathan. "Hope you're feeling better today. Remember, Monday is the Brightline briefing. Need you at your best." The Brightline briefing, of course, the next phase in their plan. I was expected to help orchestrate the demise of our own client, to be complicit in the very deception that had been hidden from me. The audacity of it triggered a new wave of anger, but something else too, a cold, clarifying purpose. I didn't respond to the text. Let him wonder. Let him assume I was still the predictable, eager-to-please assistant he thought he knew. That perception was now an asset, perhaps my only one. I changed into running clothes and left the apartment, needing physical movement to process the emotional turbulence. The lakefront path was crowded with Saturday joggers, but I barely registered them as I pushed myself to a punishing pace, feet pounding against concrete in rhythm with my racing thoughts. By the third mile, the physical exertion had cleared, some of the emotional static. I slowed to a walk, breathing hard, sweat cooling rapidly in the lake breeze. A strange calm had settled over me. Not peace exactly, but something adjacent to it. Clarity. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat, watching boats drift across the horizon. The immensity of the lake put things in perspective. Westbrook Media was just one agency in one industry in one city. What happened there mattered, yes, but it didn't define the entirety of my professional existence. I had options, resources, skills that existed independent of Nathan's validation or Diane's approval. This realization that my value wasn't determined by their assessment landed with unexpected force. For nearly a year, I had calibrated my self-worth according to feedback from people who had been manipulating me. I had internalized their metrics of success, their definitions of value, their hierarchies of worth. No more. A plan began to form, still nebulous but gaining definition with each passing moment. I wouldn't quit. That would accomplish nothing. I wouldn't confront them directly. That would only alert them to my knowledge without creating meaningful change. I wouldn't go to Ellison immediately. They might not believe an assistant over established executives, and even if they did, the legal protections for whistleblowers were strongest within a formal investigation. No, I needed to be strategic, methodical. I needed to gather more evidence, establish a clearer pattern, build a case that couldn't be dismissed as the grievance of a disgruntled employee. As I walked home, physically exhausted but mentally energized, I realized that my emotional response had completed its trajectory. I had moved through anger, shame, and betrayal to arrive at something more potent: resolve. My phone registered 5 missed calls when I checked it upon returning to my apartment. 3 from Tessa, 1 from my sister, and 1 from an unknown number. A voicemail notification blinked insistently. I played it, surprised to hear Raj's voice. "Emma, it's Raj from Design. Look, I heard what happened at the gala. It was way out of line. Well, there are things happening with the Ellison account that don't add up. If you want to talk, call me. Use my personal number, not the work line." I saved the message but didn't return the call immediately. Trust had become a luxury I couldn't afford to extend without careful consideration. Raj might be a potential ally, or he might be testing me, sent by Nathan or Diane to assess how much I knew or suspected. Instead, I showered and changed, then spent the afternoon mapping out what I knew versus what I needed to discover. I created a timeline of the Ellison account, noting discrepancies between the official narrative and what I'd uncovered. I listed potential sources of additional information, weighing risks against potential insights. By evening, my apartment had transformed. Sticky notes covered one wall in a makeshift investigation board. My dining table had disappeared beneath. Printouts of emails, data projections, and regulatory guidelines. I had moved beyond the initial emotional response to something more sustainable. A controlled, channeled intensity that would fuel the work ahead. My phone buzzed with a final text from Nathan before I silenced it for the night. Diane mentioned possibly having you handle some of the Brightline onboarding paperwork. Great opportunity to get client-facing experience. We can discuss Monday. The transparency of the manipulation would have been almost comical if it weren't so insulting. They weren't just continuing their scheme. They were attempting to make me an active participant, perhaps creating a paper trail that would implicate me if things went sideways. I placed the phone face down on my nightstand and turned away from it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new information. But tonight, I had processed the emotional earthquake, had felt the foundations shift and settle into new configurations. The person who would walk into Westbrook Media on Monday morning was not the same person who had left the gala in humiliation. That version of me had believed in mentorship, in corporate ethics, in paying dues and earning recognition. This version understood the reality of power dynamics, recognized manipulation for what it was, and most importantly, knew that true strength came not from external validation, but from unwavering adherence to one's own moral compass. As I finally drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. They had shown me exactly who they were. Now it was time to show them who I had become. Sunday morning brought unexpected clarity after a night of dreamless sleep. I woke with the certainty that before taking any action, I needed more information. Not just about the Ellison account, but about the full scope of Westbrook's operations. The flash drive contained damning evidence, certainly, but it represented just one instance of what I suspected was a pattern. After careful consideration, I decided to return Raj's call. If he was testing me on behalf of Nathan or Diane, I could still control the narrative by expressing appropriate concern about Ellison's campaign performance without revealing what I knew about the intentional manipulation. "Emma," he answered on the second ring, his voice hushed despite it being the weekend. "Thanks for calling back. Are you somewhere you can talk freely?" An odd question that immediately raised my guard. "I'm at home. What's going on, Raj?" He exhaled audibly. "Look, I've been wanting to talk to someone about this for weeks, but I wasn't sure who I could trust. After what Diane did to you at the gala, well, it made me realize that none of us are safe as long as we're keeping her secrets." "What secrets exactly are we talking about?" I kept my tone neutral, neither confirming nor denying knowledge of anything unusual. "The creative team was told to deliberately underperform on the Ellison campaign," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Design elements that tested well in focus groups were replaced with inferior versions. The UI for their new platform was intentionally made less intuitive. We were told it was a strategic pivot, but that makes no sense unless someone wants the campaign to fail, I finished. Decision made. "Have you seen the revised projection data for Q3? "No, that's above my clearance level. But I've been in meetings where Tyler from accounts kept emphasizing how the merger with Brightline would be beneficial for all parties. It felt rehearsed, like they were laying groundwork. I considered my next words carefully. I found some documents Friday night. Projection data that was manipulated to show Ellison underperforming by Q3. Emails between Diane and Nathan discussing using this as justification to push Ellison toward a merger with Brightline. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Raj spoke, his voice tight with anger. I knew it. I knew something wasn't right. They've done this before, haven't they? With Meridian Tech last year. We lost that account so suddenly, and then 3 months later they were acquired by TechSphere, another Westbrook client. This was new information. Confirmation of my suspicion that Ellison wasn't an isolated incident. "Do you have any documentation about Meridian?" I asked. "Not directly, but Vanessa in accounts might." She handled both accounts and made a comment once about how convenient the timing was. I didn't think much of it then, but now? We arranged to meet for coffee later that afternoon at a cafe far from any of the usual agency haunts. Before ending the call, Raj added, "Be careful, Emma. I think the reason Diane reacted so strongly to that spill wasn't just about her suit. It was about control. She can't stand when things don't go according to her plan." After hanging up, I spent the morning creating a secure digital workspace where I could organize the growing evidence. If Raj was genuine, and my instincts suggested he was, then we might be looking at a pattern of corporate manipulation spanning multiple accounts and several years. The cafe Raj had suggested was a small independent place in a residential neighborhood, the kind of spot unlikely to be frequented by Westbrook employees. I arrived early, selecting a table in the back corner with a view of both the entrance and the rear exit. Paranoid, perhaps, but recent events had justifiably eroded my trust. Raj arrived 10 minutes late, looking over his shoulder as he entered. He spotted me and wove between tables, clutching a messenger bag close to his side. "Sorry," he said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. "Wanted to make sure I wasn't followed." "Are things really that cloak and dagger?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood despite my own precautions. His expression remained serious. "Maybe not, but I've worked at Westbrook for 3 years, and I've seen 7 people unexpectedly resign after raising questions about account management decisions. The official story is always that they got better offers, but the timing never felt coincidental." He unzipped his bag and removed a folder, sliding it across the table. I couldn't access the financial projections, but I did pull together all the creative briefs and revision histories for both Ellison and Meridian. Look at the pattern of changes. I opened the folder to find printouts meticulously annotated, with yellow highlighter and margin notes. Raj had documented every instance where winning design elements had been modified to less effective versions, where successful messaging had been diluted, where user experience had been compromised. "The changes always came after initial success metrics," he explained, voice low. "It's like they wanted to prove the concept was sound before deliberately sabotaging it. That way the client couldn't claim the strategy was flawed from the beginning, just that it couldn't sustain results." As I reviewed the documents, a larger pattern emerged. The compromised campaigns all belonged to smaller, innovative companies in sectors where larger Westbrook clients were seeking to expand market share. In each case, the smaller company had eventually been acquired by or merged with the larger entity. "This isn't just unethical marketing," I said slowly, the full implications crystallizing. "This looks like market manipulation. They're using their position as a trusted advisor to influence corporate valuations and acquisitions." Raj nodded grimly. "And it gets worse. I did some digging into Westbrook's parent company, Criterion Holdings. Guess who sits on their board? The CEO of TechSphere, who acquired Meridian, and the majority shareholder of Integrated Media Partners, which owns 30% of Brightline Digital." The revelation hit me with physical force. This wasn't just a case of an agency playing both sides against the middle for increased billings. This was a coordinated strategy to devalue target companies through manipulated campaign performance, facilitating their acquisition by larger entities with direct ties to Westbrook's parent company. The conflicts of interest were staggering, potentially crossing from unethical into illegal territory. "How deep does this go?" I asked, mind racing to process the implications. "How many people at Westbrook know about this?" Raj shrugged, running a hand through his hair. "The executive team, certainly. Department heads like Nathan, probably. Below that? Hard to say. Most of us just follow directions without seeing the bigger picture." "And the clients themselves?" The acquiring companies must know. The timing is too perfect. The targets, like Ellison? I doubt it. They trust Westbrook as their agency of record. Why would they suspect their marketing partner is actively working against their interests? I sat back, trying to absorb the magnitude of what we had uncovered. What had begun as personal humiliation at a corporate event had led to the discovery of systematic corporate manipulation, potentially affecting dozens of companies and thousands of employees across multiple industries. We need more evidence, I said finally. Concrete financial data showing the pattern, internal communications confirming intent. Without that, it's just conjecture, even with the creative revisions as supporting evidence. Raj hesitated, then leaned forward. There's someone else who might help. Vanessa Kim in accounting. She's been uncomfortable with some of the financial directives for months. After what happened to you at the gala, she approached me, knowing we sometimes collaborate on projects. She has access to the financial reporting systems. Can we trust her? After Nathan's betrayal, I was wary of extending trust too easily. I think so. She's been with Westbrook for 8 years, passed over for promotion 3 times despite excellent performance reviews. Word is Diane doesn't consider her executive material. She has her own reasons to want things to change. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Set up a meeting, somewhere private, and Raj. Don't put anything in writing. No emails, no texts, not through company channels or personal devices. He nodded, understanding the precaution. What about tomorrow? The Brightline briefing. Are you going in? I had considered calling in sick, avoiding the office while I processed everything. But that would only raise suspicions, potentially alerting Diane and Nathan that something was amiss. I'll be there, I said. Acting normal, playing my part. They expect me to be slightly subdued after the gala incident, but ultimately compliant. That's exactly what they'll see. As Raj gathered his materials, a new thought struck me. The client presentation for Ellison's Q2 results is next week, right? Will you be there? I'm scheduled to present the creative performance metrics. Why? Because that might be our best opportunity to gather everyone involved in one room. Westbrook executives, Ellison decision-makers, possibly even representatives. From Brightline if they're laying merger groundwork. If we're going to act, that meeting would maximize impact. He looked uncertain. What exactly are you planning, Emma? I wasn't entirely sure yet, but the outlines of a strategy we're taking. Shape. Something that can't be dismissed or covered up. Something that addresses the systemic issue, not just the Ellison situation. But first, we need irrefutable evidence, which means we need Vanessa. As we parted ways outside the cafe, I felt a strange sense of vertigo, the disorienting recognition that what had begun as a personal grievance had expanded into something far larger than myself. The coffee spill, Diane's cruelty, Nathan's betrayal. These were merely symptoms of a corporate culture built on deception and manipulation. The revelation had transformed my understanding not just of recent events, but of my entire professional experience at Westbrook. The meritocracy I thought I was working within was actually a carefully managed system of exploitation, where talent and dedication were resources to be harvested rather than attributes to be rewarded. Walking home through the afternoon sunshine, I felt oddly lightened despite the weight of what we'd uncovered. The path forward was fraught with risk, certainly, but for the first time since joining Westbrook, I was acting with full awareness of the true dynamics at play. The revelation had stripped away illusions, leaving only clarity of purpose in their place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I returned to Westbrook, performing the role of chastened assistant while advancing our investigation. But tonight, I would continue building our case, preparing for a reckoning none of them saw coming. Monday morning arrived with a physical weight that settled in my chest as I dressed for work. I chose my outfit carefully. A charcoal gray suit I rarely wore, conservative and unmemorable. Today was about blending in, becoming part of the background scenery at Westbrook Media while advancing our investigation. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like ascending to a theatrical performance where I'd been cast in a role. I now understood completely. The doors opened to reveal the familiar hustle of a Monday morning. Creative teams huddled around concept boards, account managers balancing coffee cups while scrolling through emails, the steady hum of an agency preparing to launch into a new week of campaigns and pitches. Several colleagues glanced my way as I walked to my desk, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. News of the gala incident had clearly circulated. A few offered tight smiles or awkward nods. Most averted their eyes, unsure how to acknowledge what had happened. I nodded politely in return, projecting a carefully calibrated demeanor, not defeated, but appropriately subdued. Nathan's office door was closed, his silhouette visible through the frosted glass as he spoke, on the phone. I booted up my computer and began sorting through weekend emails, settling into the routine that had defined my professional life for nearly a year. The familiarity of these actions felt surreal now, knowing what lay beneath the surface. My phone buzzed with a text from Raj, "V on board, meeting set for lunch, same place as yesterday." So Vanessa had agreed to help. That was the first piece falling into place. I deleted the message immediately and continued working, organizing Nathan's schedule for the week ahead, including the Brightline briefing scheduled for 10:30. At precisely 9:45, Nathan's door opened. He paused in the doorway, assessing me with an expression I now recognized as calculation rather than concern. "Emma," he said, approaching my desk, "good to see you in today. How are you feeling after Friday?" I looked up, meeting his gaze with a carefully neutral expression. "Fine, thank you. It was just an accident." "That's the spirit," he said, his relief visible. "These things happen. The important thing is how we recover, right? Professional. Resilience and all that." I nodded, offering a small smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The Brightline briefing materials are ready. I've prepared copies for everyone and updated the presentation with the latest metrics." Metrics I now knew were deliberately manipulated, though the knowledge remained carefully hidden behind my professional mask. "Excellent. That's what I appreciate about you, Emma. Your ability to focus on what matters." He leaned against my desk, lowering his voice. "Between us, Diane feels terrible about overreacting. It was the stress of the Ellison situation. You understand." The lie was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Diane Westbrook had never felt terrible about anything in her professional life, and certainly not about putting an assistant in her place. But I nodded as if this information brought relief. "Of course, no hard feelings. That's what makes you special. Most people in this business can't separate the personal from the professional." He straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "We'll head to the Brightline briefing together. I want you to take notes on their marketing automation needs. Good experience for you." As he walked away, I felt a chill of recognition. This wasn't just about bringing me to a meeting. It was about creating a paper trail connecting me to the Brightline relationship, making me complicit in whatever scheme they were orchestrating. If things went sideways, they'd have documentation showing my involvement. The briefing itself was an exercise in theatrical performance. Executives from Brightline Digital arrived with the confident air of people who already knew the outcome. Of negotiations not yet officially begun, Nathan introduced me as our Ellison specialist, a designation that carried new meaning given what I now knew about their plans for that account. I took meticulous notes, recording everything while appearing to notice nothing unusual. When questions arose about Ellison's market position, I provided factual information without embellishment, careful not to reveal my awareness of the manipulation underway. Throughout the 90-minute meeting, I felt Diane's gaze land on me periodically, assessing, evaluating, measuring my compliance. When the Brightline team departed, Diane lingered behind. "Good work in there," she said, addressing Nathan but looking at me. "Make sure Emma has access to the integration files. We'll want to move quickly once the Ellison situation evolves." The casual reference to their client's engineered downfall sent a surge of anger through me, but I maintained my neutral expression, nodding as if receiving routine instructions. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of tasks and meetings, each one now viewed through the lens of my new understanding. Projects I had once approached with enthusiasm now revealed themselves as components in a larger system of manipulation and control. At 12:15, I told Nathan I was stepping out for lunch. He barely glanced up from his computer, waving me off with the distracted air of someone secure in their authority. The 10-block walk to the cafe cleared my head, helping me transition from the role I was playing to the person I had become. Raj and Vanessa had secured the same corner table. Vanessa Kim was not what I had expected. Where Raj carried his anxiety visibly, tension radiating from his hunched shoulders, Vanessa projected calm confidence. Her sleek bob and precisely applied makeup suggested attention to detail, while her direct gaze conveyed immediate intelligence. "Emma," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you, even before the gala incident." "All good, I hope," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. A slight smile crossed her face. Diane doesn't waste time complaining about mediocre employees. Her irritation is reserved for people she considers threats. This unexpected perspective momentarily shifted my understanding of the dynamics at play. "And what category do you fall into?" "Invisible," she said simply. 8 years of competence without ambition makes you part of the furniture. People talk freely when they think no one important is listening. She opened her tablet, activating privacy screen filters before turning it toward me. "These are the financial projections for Ellison, Meridian, and 2 other accounts, Pinnacle Health and Quantum Software. All 4 followed identical patterns." The screen displayed a series of graphs showing campaign performance metrics across multiple quarters. Each showed the same trajectory: strong initial performance followed by an engineered decline beginning precisely when the campaigns should have been gaining momentum. "This is from our internal reporting system," she explained. "Now compare it to what was presented to the clients." She swiped to a new set of graphs, the sanitized versions shown to Ellison and the others, where the decline appeared as a natural market response rather than an orchestrated outcome. "The manipulation goes beyond creative decisions," she continued, swiping through additional screens of financial data. "They're inflating hours, charging for services never rendered, and structuring contracts to maximize payouts during the initial successful phase." Raj leaned forward. "It's comprehensive. They're not just tanking the campaigns, they're extracting maximum profit while doing it." Vanessa nodded. "And there's more. 2 days after each campaign showed its first engineered decline, Criterion Holdings, Westbrook's parent company, adjusted its investment positions in the relevant sectors. This was the missing piece, the financial motivation beyond increased agency billings. "They're short-selling," I realized aloud, "betting against their own clients." "Exactly. Then using their insider knowledge of the manipulated campaigns to time their market moves perfectly." Vanessa's expression remained calm, but her eyes reflected deep disgust. "It's not just unethical, it's illegal. Market manipulation, securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty." The scope of the deception momentarily overwhelmed me. What had begun as personal humiliation had led to the discovery of corporate corruption on a scale I could hardly process. The implications affected not just Ellison, but potentially dozens of companies, hundreds of employees, thousands of shareholders. "We need to take this to the authorities," Raj said, voicing what we were all thinking. Vanessa's response was measured. "We need more than graphs and spreadsheets. We need communications proving intent. Without that, Diane will claim these were legitimate strategic pivots, not deliberate sabotage." They both turned to me, waiting for my input. I realized this was the moment, the decision point that would determine not just my professional future, but my understanding of myself. I could walk away, find another job, leave this corruption behind. I could make an anonymous report and hope authorities would investigate. Or I could act decisively, using my position to expose the truth in a way that couldn't be ignored or covered up. The weight of the decision pressed on me. The safest option was to walk away. The most conventionally responsible option was to report anonymously. But neither addressed the systemic problem or held the responsible parties fully accountable. The Ellison Q2 presentation is Thursday, I said finally. Everyone will be there. Ellison executives, Westbrook leadership, account teams. If we're going to act, that's our moment. What exactly are you suggesting? Vanessa asked, her expression both cautious and curious. A public exposure. Not just to authorities after the fact, but to everyone simultaneously. Clients, executives, employees, industry press. Something that can't be contained or spun. Raj looked alarmed. That's career suicide. They'll blacklist all of us. Maybe, I acknowledged. Or maybe exposing corruption on this scale redefines our careers. Either way, we'd be acting according to our values, not their rules. The three of us sat in silence, the magnitude of the potential actions settling over the table. Finally, Vanessa spoke. To do this right, we'd need irrefutable evidence of intent, communications, recordings, something that clearly shows they knew what they were doing. I thought of Nathan's office, of the executive meeting rooms where decisions were made, of the digital systems where communications were stored. Access was the key. Access I had as Nathan's trusted assistant. I can get that evidence, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. But I'll need both of you to help compile and organize what we already have. We need to make our case airtight. The choice, once made, brought unexpected clarity. The anger and betrayal that had driven me since Friday night transformed into focused resolve. This wasn't about revenge for a public humiliation anymore. It was about justice, accountability, and protecting others from becoming victims of the same system. As we outlined next steps, dividing responsibilities and establishing secure communication protocols, I felt a profound shift in my understanding of power. True power wasn't Diane's ability to humiliate subordinates or Nathan's skill at manipulation. True power lay in the choice to act with integrity even at personal cost. I returned to Westbrook after lunch, moving through the familiar space with new purpose. The decision had been made. The path forward was clear. Whatever consequences followed, I would face them knowing I had chosen to stand for something larger than myself. Nathan glanced up as I passed his office. Everything good, Emma? I smiled, the expression genuine for the first time in days. Better than good. Everything is exactly as it should be. The next 2 days became an intricate dance of maintaining appearances while systematically gathering evidence. Each hour at Westbrook now served a dual purpose, fulfilling my official duties while advancing our investigation. Tuesday morning brought a new level of complexity when Diane called me into her office, a rare summons that immediately put me on high alert. Close the door, she instructed as I entered. Her office occupied the building's corner, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. Unlike Nathan's space, with its creative clutter and industry awards, Diane's office was minimalist to the point of severity. Glass, chrome, and white surfaces, uninterrupted by personal touches. I wanted to speak with you directly about the Ellison presentation, she said, not bothering with preamble. Nathan tells me you've been instrumental in preparing the Q2 analysis. I maintained a neutral expression, though my pulse quickened. Yes, I've been compiling the performance metrics and organizing the presentation flow. She studied me with the calculating gaze I'd come to recognize. the look of someone constantly assessing utility and threat potential. "I understand there," was some awkwardness at the gala. "I want to assure you that such incidents don't impact professional evaluations at Westbrook." The statement was so clearly disingenuous that responding felt almost unnecessary, but the role required it. "I appreciate that, Ms. Westbrook. Given your involvement with the Ellison account, I'd like you to attend Thursday's presentation. Not just to take notes, but to address specific sections of the performance data." This was unexpected, potentially an opportunity, but also possibly a trap. "Which sections specifically?" "The demographic engagement metrics and the Q3 projections," she said, watching my reaction closely. "Nathan speaks highly of your analytical skills. This is a chance to demonstrate them directly to the client." The Q3 projections, the very data I knew to be deliberately manipulated. She was testing me, creating a situation where I would either have to present falsified information as fact or risk exposing what I knew prematurely. "I'd be happy to present those sections," I said, matching her evaluative gaze with calm assurance. "I've been tracking the patterns closely." Something like satisfaction flickered across her face. "Excellent. We'll need you to join the prep session tomorrow afternoon as well. My assistant will send the details." As I left her office, the implication was clear. Diane was accelerating my involvement in the Ellison deception, creating a paper trail linking me directly to the manipulated projections. If our plan failed, I would be positioned as a knowing participant rather than a whistleblower. I texted Raj as soon as I was back at my desk. "Timeline accelerated. Meeting needed tonight." His response came quickly. "V's Place, 8 p.m., address to follow." The workday continued with a new edge of tension. I focused on gathering additional evidence, downloading communication logs, copying relevant files, photographing documents that couldn't be digitally accessed. Each action required careful timing to avoid detection by Westbrook's security systems. During lunch, I created a secure email account using a public library computer, then sent carefully scrubbed copies of key documents to this address, insurance against any attempt to seize or destroy evidence later. By late afternoon, I had compiled a substantial dossier, but still lacked the smoking gun, explicit communications proving that the manipulation was intentional and orchestrated at the highest levels. My opportunity came unexpectedly when Nathan approached my desk at 5:45. "Emma, I need to rush to a dinner with the Brightline execs. Can you finish the Ellison slide deck? Everything's there except the Q3 projection visuals. Use the revised dataset, not the original analytics." This was it, direct verbal instruction to use manipulated data. The revised set in the shared folder? I asked innocently. "No, the one on my desktop. I'll send you remote access credentials. Just don't upload the finished deck until I review it in the morning." I nodded, accepting the handwritten credentials he scribbled on a post-it. "No problem. I'll have it ready for your review first thing." As soon as he left, I used the credentials to access not just his desktop, but his entire digital workspace. Emails, calendar, project files, everything. Working quickly but methodically, I began searching for communications related to the Ellison account and the Brightline merger. The evidence was even more damning than anticipated. Emails between Diane, Nathan, and Criterion Holdings executives explicitly discuss the strategy of engineering campaign underperformance to drive down Ellison's market valuation. Calendar entries showed meetings with Brightline predating any official merger discussions. Financial projections detailed how Westbrook would benefit from increased billings once the larger Brightline account absorbed Ellison's budget. Most significantly, I found a presentation Nathan had given to Westbrook's executive team 6 months earlier, outlining what he called strategic client evolution, a euphemism for the systematic practice of identifying acquisition targets, winning their business, manipulating campaign performance, and facilitating their absorption by larger clients. The presentation included case studies of past successes, Meridian Tech, Pinnacle Health, and Quantum Software, complete with timelines showing how deliberately failed campaigns had preceded each acquisition. I downloaded everything, sending copies to both my secure email and a cloud storage account created specifically for this purpose. Then, as requested, I completed the Ellison slide deck, but I created two versions. One using the falsified data, as instructed, the other showing the true performance metrics side by side with the manipulated ones, clearly labeled to show the discrepancy. By 7:30, I had finished both the assigned task and my evidence gathering. I locked my computer, gathered my things, and headed to Vanessa's apartment, the USB drive containing our case tucked securely in an inner pocket of my jacket. Vanessa lived in a converted industrial building in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, the kind of space featured in lifestyle magazines showcasing urban professionals. Her loft reflected her personality, organized, elegant, and deceptively simple, at first glance revealing complexity upon closer inspection. Raj had arrived before me and was already reviewing documents at Vanessa's dining table, which had been transformed into a war room of sorts. Laptops, tablets, and paper files arranged in precise order. "You look like you've found something," Vanessa observed as I joined them. "More than something," I replied, connecting the USB drive to her computer. "Direct evidence of intent, planning, and execution." Nathan gave me access to his entire system to finish the Ellison presentation. We spent the next hour reviewing the new evidence, organizing it into categories that built our case. Strategic planning documents showing the systematic nature of the scheme, communications proving knowledge and intent at the executive level, financial records demonstrating the pattern across multiple accounts, technical documentation of how campaign performance was deliberately undermined. "This is comprehensive," Vanessa said finally, leaning back from the screen. "With this evidence, we have options for how to proceed." "What kind of options?" Raj asked, tension evident in his voice. The reality of what we were preparing to do seemed to be hitting him anew. "We could take this directly to the SEC and the FTC," she said. "Securities fraud and deceptive business practices fall under their jurisdictions. Or we could approach Ellison's leadership privately before the presentation." I considered both suggestions, weighing them against our original plan. If we go to regulators first, Westbrook's legal team will have time to construct defenses, destroy evidence, and potentially identify us as the source. If we warn Ellison privately, Diane might be tipped off by her contacts there. "So we proceed with the public exposure during Thursday's presentation?" Raj confirmed. "Yes, but with modifications based on what we now know," I said, outlining my revised approach. "Instead of just exposing the Ellison manipulation, we present the entire pattern, all 4 accounts, the executive planning documents, everything. And we don't just present to those in the room. We time it to reach multiple audiences simultaneously." Vanessa nodded, understanding immediately. "A coordinated release, financial press, industry publications, regulatory agencies, and the clients themselves, all receiving the evidence at the same moment we present it." "Exactly. No chance for containment or spin." The logistics of such coordination required precise planning. We spent the next 3 hours creating secure document packages for different recipients, drafting explanatory cover letters, establishing secure transmission methods, and setting up timed releases. Everything had to be ready to deploy at exactly 2:15 p.m. on Thursday, the midpoint of the Ellison presentation when I would be called upon to present the manipulated Q3 projections. "What about our protection?" Raj asked as we finalized the details. "Whistleblower laws have limitations, and Westbrook's legal team will come after us with everything they have." It was a valid concern. "I've consulted with an employment attorney," I admitted. "Preliminarily and without specifics. He confirmed that evidence of securities fraud and market manipulation would qualify for federal whistleblower protections. but advised documenting everything and having legal representation ready immediately after disclosure. Vanessa reached for her phone. My brother's law school roommate specializes in corporate whistleblower cases. Let me see if he's available for Thursday afternoon. As she stepped away to make the call, Raj turned to me. Are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back. Our careers at Westbrook are over, and possibly in the industry as a whole. The question deserved honest consideration. Was I willing to sacrifice the career I had worked so hard to build? Were the principles at stake worth the personal cost? Our careers at Westbrook are already compromised, I said finally. Either we become complicit in their schemes, or will eventually be pushed out for raising questions. As for the industry, I'd rather build a new career than succeed in one that rewards this kind of behavior. He nodded slowly. When you put it that way. I've been uncomfortable for months, making excuses for decisions that felt wrong. Whatever happens Thursday, at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror again. Vanessa returned with confirmation that legal counsel would be on standby Thursday afternoon. We finalized our preparation, assigning last-minute tasks and establishing communication protocols for the next day. By midnight, our strategy was set, our evidence prepared, our contingencies planned. As I gathered my things to leave, Vanessa placed a hand on my arm. This started because Diane humiliated you publicly, she said. But it's become something much more important. It has, I agreed. Thursday isn't about revenge for that moment. It's about accountability for a system that enables people like Diane to abuse their power at others' expense. Walking home through quiet streets, I felt a strange calm despite the magnitude of what we were preparing to do. The past few days had transformed me from someone seeking personal vindication to someone fighting for systemic change. Whatever consequences Thursday brought, I would face them knowing I had chosen integrity over compliance, action over acceptance. Tomorrow would be the final day of preparation, my last opportunity to gather any remaining evidence while maintaining the facade of the dutiful assistant. Then would come Thursday, and with it, a reckoning none of them saw coming. Wednesday unfolded with an otherworldly quality, as if I were moving through a familiar landscape suddenly rendered in slightly different colors. The office remained physically unchanged, the same open floor plan, the same rhythmic clacking of keyboards, the same strategic planning sessions behind glass walls, but my perception had fundamentally altered. I performed my routine tasks with mechanical precision, while my mind continuously assessed each interaction, each document, each email for its potential value to our case. The dual consciousness required, outwardly compliant while inwardly vigilant, created a strange dissociation that left me both hyper-aware and strangely detached. At 2:00 p.m., I joined Nathan and the creative team for the Ellison presentation prep session. Diane arrived 15 minutes late, commanding the room's attention without effort as she settled at the head of the conference table. Let's review the narrative arc, she said without preamble. Nathan, walk us through the flow. Nathan launched into a polished overview of the presentation strategy, beginning with the campaign's initial successes, transitioning to emerging challenges in the current quarter, and culminating in projections showing accelerating underperformance in Q3. The thoroughness of the deception was remarkable. Every data point had been carefully massaged, every graph subtly manipulated to tell a story of inevitable decline. Emma will present the demographic engagement metrics and Q3 projections, Nathan said, nodding in my direction. She's developed excellent insights into the pattern shifts. All eyes turned to me expectantly. I felt a momentary vertigo, aware of the chasm between the role I was playing and my actual intentions 24 hours from now. The key message is consistent across all demographics, I said, pulling up the manipulated slides I'd prepared according to Nathan's instructions. Initial strong engagement, followed by progressive disengagement, with the steepest declines projected, In the 2534 Urban Professional segment, Ellison's core market. Diane nodded approvingly. Good. Emphasize that this isn't just a temporary fluctuation but indicative of deeper market positioning issues. The goal is to create receptivity to strategic alternatives without explicitly mentioning Brightline yet. Of course, I replied, meeting her gaze with practiced neutrality. I've included comparison visualizations that make the trajectory unmistakable. The meeting continued for another hour, each participant refining their segment of the carefully orchestrated deception. I took detailed notes, not for the stated purpose of presentation preparation, but as additional evidence of explicit intent. As we concluded, Diane addressed me directly. Emma, I'd like you to join the executive breakfast with Ellison tomorrow before the main presentation. 8 a.m., the Hamilton Hotel, business formal. The invitation represented a significant elevation, executive. Breakfasts were typically reserved for department heads and above. I understood immediately that this was part of the same strategy as having me present the manipulated data, creating a record of my involvement at every stage. Thank you for the opportunity, I said, the words tasting bitter despite my neutral. Tonta, I'll be there. As the room cleared, Nathan lingered behind, waiting until we were alone before speaking. You've handled this week impressively, he said, leaning against the conference table. Most people would still be licking their wounds after what happened at the gala. The casual reference to my public humiliation sent a flicker of anger through me, quickly suppressed. It was just an accident, I replied. Still, Diane doesn't forget things easily. The fact that she's giving you visibility with Ellison shows how valuable you've become to the team. There could be significant opportunities for advancement once the Brightline situation develops. The implication was clear. Continued complicity would be rewarded with career advancement. I wondered how many others at Westbrook had received similar implied promises, choosing security and promotion over questioning increasingly unethical practices. I appreciate the vote of confidence, I said carefully. I'm focused on making tomorrow's presentation successful. He clapped me on the shoulder before leaving, a gesture of camaraderie that once would have filled me with pride, but now felt hollow. I remained in the conference room for several minutes after he left, using the time to send coded updates to Raj and Vanessa about the executive breakfast addition to our timeline. The remainder of the workday passed in similar duality, outward, performance of my role, while inwardly finalizing details of tomorrow's exposure. By 6 o'clock, when I finally left the office, physical and mental exhaustion had set in. The constant vigilance, the performance of normalcy, the weight of what we were preparing to do, all of it exacted a toll I could no longer ignore. Instead of heading home, I walked to a small park several blocks from Westbrook's building. The early evening air carried the first hints of autumn, a welcome respite from summer's lingering heat. I found an empty bench overlooking a small pond and sat, allowing myself the luxury of unguarded reflection for the first time in days. Tomorrow would irrevocably alter the course of my professional life. Once we exposed Westbrook's systematic fraud, there would be no return to the career path I had envisioned when joining the agency. The industry connections I had carefully cultivated, the portfolio I had built, the professional identity I had constructed, all of it would become complicated by my role as a whistleblower. Was I truly prepared for the consequences? The question surfaced with unexpected force, bringing with it a wave of doubt I had suppressed during our frantic preparation. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. Drinks tonight? Haven't seen you in forever. The message from my former roommate, uninvolved and unaware of the situation, provided a sudden perspective shift. There was still a world beyond Westbrook, beyond the all-consuming focus of our investigation. I could step back, find another job, leave this corruption behind without sacrificing my career prospects. The temptation of that easier path spread through me like warmth, offering relief from the pressure of what we had planned. Why shouldering this burden? Why not leave it to someone with more authority, more protection, more institutional power? As I contemplated this potential escape route, an older woman took a seat at the opposite end of my bench, tossing breadcrumbs to the gathering ducks. She noticed my preoccupation and smiled. "Heavy thoughts for such a lovely evening," she observed. I managed a polite smile in return. "Just a work decision I'm struggling with." She nodded sagely. "The hardest decisions are usually between what's easy and what's right. Been facing those my whole life." The simple wisdom of her statement cut through my rationalizations. This wasn't just about my career trajectory or professional reputation. It was about the fundamental values that defined me beyond any job title or industry affiliation. I thought of the Ellison employees whose livelihoods would be affected by Westbrook's manipulation. I thought of other clients who might become targets of similar schemes if this pattern continued unchecked. I thought of junior staff like myself, gradually pulled into unethical practices through incremental compromises justified as industry realities. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Raj. "Last-minute prep meeting? Getting nervous." The vulnerability in his message reminded me that I wasn't acting alone. Raj and Vanessa had committed to this course of action, accepting similar risks to their careers. They had trusted my judgment, my determination, my conviction, that this was worth the inevitable fallout. I texted back, "Meet at the usual spot in 30. We've got this." Rising from the bench, I nodded farewell to the woman still feeding ducks. The brief interaction had served its purpose, jolting me out of spiraling doubt and back to the clarity of purpose that had been momentarily obscured by fear. The walk to our meeting spot, a 24-hour diner far from agency haunts, gave me time to process the inner conflict that had surfaced. The doubt wasn't about whether exposing Westbrook was the right thing to do. The evidence was clear, the ethical imperative undeniable. The conflict arose from the very human fear of consequences, of stepping into uncertainty when the comfortable alternative, however compromised, remained available. Raj was already at our usual corner booth when I arrived, fidgeting with a paper napkin he had shredded into confetti. Vanessa joined us moments later, her customary composure showing slight cracks around the edges, a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes. "Having second thoughts?" she asked directly, sliding into the booth beside Raj. "Momentary wobble," I admitted. The reality of tomorrow hit me all at once. Raj looked relieved at my honesty. "Same here. I've been alternating between absolute certainty and complete panic all afternoon." Vanessa signaled for coffee before responding. "It would be strange if we weren't experiencing doubt. What we're preparing to do carries significant risk. The question is whether those risks outweigh the cost of inaction." "They don't," I said, finding renewed conviction in articulating it aloud. "If we remain silent, we become complicit. We validate the system that rewards this behavior. We tell Diane and Nathan and everyone like them that they can humiliate subordinates, deceive clients, and manipulate markets without consequence." Raj nodded slowly, gathering the shredded napkin into a pile. "When you put it that way, the momentary discomfort of tomorrow seems worth it." "It's not just about accountability for past actions," Vanessa added, thanking the server who delivered 3 coffees. "It's about preventing future harm. How many more companies would be targeted? How many more employees drawn into unethical practices? Where does it end if nobody ever says enough?" We spent the next hour reviewing final preparations, addressing contingencies, and reassuring each other. The practical focus helped settle the emotional turbulence, grounding us in the concrete details of our plan rather than the abstract fears of its aftermath. As we prepared to leave, I shared one last thought that had crystallized during my moment of doubt in the park. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you both to know that I'm proud to be taking this stand with you. Not because it's easy or safe, but precisely because it isn't. Sometimes integrity means choosing discomfort over compromise. Vanessa's usually reserved expression softened. We're not just exposing corruption tomorrow. We're affirming what kind of professionals, what kind of people we choose to be. Raj straightened his shoulders, a new resolve visible in his posture. See you at the executive breakfast, Emma, and then, well, then we make history. We parted ways outside the diner, each heading home for what would likely be a restless night before tomorrow's reckoning. The inner conflict hadn't vanished entirely. Doubt rarely disappears completely in the face of difficult choices, but it had been acknowledged, examined, and integrated into a deeper commitment to our course of action. As I walked through the darkening city streets toward my apartment, I realized that this moment of questioning had been necessary. Blind certainty without examination of consequences would have been naivete, not courage. By facing my fears directly, by acknowledging the easier paths available and consciously rejecting them, I had transformed tentative resolve into genuine conviction. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. The variables beyond our control were numerous, the potential outcomes impossible to predict with certainty. But the core decision, to stand for integrity even at personal cost, that I could control. That choice, at least, was entirely mine to make. And I had made it. Thursday morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that sometimes accompanies momentous days. The sky was a perfect autumn blue, the air crisp and energizing as I walked the 6 blocks from my apartment to the Hamilton Hotel. I had chosen my outfit with particular care. A charcoal gray suit with subtle pinstriping, professional, without being flashy, authoritative without being aggressive. The kind of outfit that communicated competence and confidence without drawing undue attention. The hotel's restaurant occupied its mezzanine level, an elegant space of polished wood and muted gold lighting. I arrived precisely at 7:50, early, enough to appear eager, but not so early as to seem anxious. The maitre d' directed me to a private dining room where Diane, Nathan, and 2 other Westbrook executives were already seated with 3 representatives from Ellison. Emma, glad you could join us, Nathan said, rising slightly as I approached. Let me introduce Craig Ellison, founder and CEO, Meera Patel, CMO, and Daniel Weber, their director of strategy. I shook hands with each client representative, noting the slight surprise in Craig Ellison's expression when Diane introduced me as our lead analyst on demographic engagement metrics. The elevation from assistant to analyst wasn't lost on him or on me. Emma's insights have been invaluable to understanding the shift in consumer response patterns, Diane added smoothly, gesturing for me to take the empty seat beside Nathan. The breakfast proceeded with carefully choreographed precision. Small talk about industry trends gave way to subtle positioning statements about market consolidation creating opportunities for agile brands. Craig Ellison responded with predictable concerns about maintaining brand identity and customer loyalty in a changing landscape. That's precisely why today's presentation is so crucial, Diane said, signaling a server to refill coffee cups. The data tells a story about where your brand positioning stands relative to evolving consumer expectations. Emma will be walking you through some particularly illuminating projections this afternoon. All eyes turned to me momentarily. I smiled with practiced confidence. The patterns emerging in Q2 point to some interesting opportunities for strategic repositioning, I said, using the exact phrasing Nathan had suggested during yesterday's prep session. Looking forward to it, Craig replied, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. We've invested heavily in the current positioning based on your team's recommendations. Diane smoothly redirected the conversation, but the momentary tension lingered. Craig Ellison wasn't a tech founder who had stumbled into success. He was a seasoned entrepreneur who had built his company methodically over 15 years. His instincts were clearly registering something off about Westbrook's sudden pivot from enthusiastic campaign architects to harbingers of underperformance. As the breakfast concluded, I exchanged business cards with Meera Patel, using the moment to assess whether she might be more receptive to our revelations than her colleagues. The sharp intelligence in her eyes and the precision of her questions throughout breakfast suggested she had her own reservations about Westbrook's narrative. "Your demographic analysis background is impressive," she commented, glancing at my card. "I'd love to hear more about your methodology sometime." "Perhaps after today's presentation," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "I think you'll find the complete data picture illuminating." She nodded, a barely perceptible narrowing of her eyes suggesting she'd caught the emphasis in my phrasing. Whether that would translate to receptivity during the presentation remained to be seen. We returned to Westbrook's offices as a group. The Ellison team escorted to a VIP conference room while the Westbrook executives gathered in Diane's office for final alignment. I used the brief window to send a prearranged signal to Raj and Vanessa. Breakfast complete. Proceeding as planned. The 3 hours between the breakfast and the scheduled presentation passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. I reviewed my section of the presentation repeatedly, ensuring I could transition seamlessly from the manipulated data to the true metrics at the crucial moment. I confirmed receipt of Vanessa's message that all evidence packages were ready for simultaneous distribution. I verified that Raj had secured our technical needs for the presentation room. At 1:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled start, I made a final visit to the restroom. Locking myself in a stall, I took several deep breaths, centering myself for what was to come. The face that greeted me in the mirror as I washed my hands showed none of the turmoil beneath. Just a composed professional ready to present market analysis to valued clients. The main conference room had been arranged theater-style, with Ellison's team of 8 seated in the front row facing a projection screen. Behind them sat various Westbrook team members involved with the account. Diane and Nathan occupied seats at a small table to the right of the presentation area, positioned to observe both the presenters and the client reactions. I took my place in the back row as Nathan opened the presentation with an overview of campaign performance. His smooth delivery and carefully cultivated charm created an atmosphere of collaborative problem-solving, rather than the delivery of disappointing results. While initial engagement metrics exceeded projections, we've identified emerging challenges in sustaining that momentum, he explained, transitioning to the first data visualization. A graph showing gradual performance decline. What the clients couldn't see, what only Vanessa, Raj, and I knew, was that this decline existed only in manipulated reports, not in the campaign's actual performance. The presentation continued through various aspects of the campaign, each presenter building the case for strategic reconsideration without explicitly mentioning merger possibilities. Tension gradually built in the room as the implications became clearer. Craig Ellison's expression grew increasingly troubled, while Meera Patel took notes with focused intensity. At precisely 2:10, Nathan introduced me. Next, Emma Harlow will walk you through our demographic engagement analysis and Q3 projections, which provide crucial context for our recommendations. I rose and moved to the presenter position, connecting my laptop to the presentation system. The familiar slide deck appeared on screen, the version with manipulated data showing accelerating decline across key demographics. "Thank you, Nathan," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my system. "Before I present these projections, I want to ensure we're all working with accurate information." Nathan's brow furrowed slightly at this unscripted opening, but he maintained his professional smile. I continued, clicking to advance the slide. Instead of the expected graph, the screen displayed 2 data visualizations side by side, labeled Manipulated Projections and Actual Performance. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Nathan half rose from his seat, confusion, rapidly transforming to alarm. "What you're seeing," I said, my voice clear and measured, "is the difference between the data I was instructed to present today and the actual performance metrics of your campaign, which continues to exceed all Original projections. Diane stood abruptly. There seems to be some confusion. Perhaps we should take a brief recess? There's no confusion, Ms. Westbrook, I replied, clicking to the next slide. A series of emails between Diane, Nathan, and Criterion Holdings. Executives explicitly discussing the engineered performance decline. These communications clearly established that Ellison's campaign was deliberately sabotaged to devalue the company and facilitate its acquisition by Brightline Digital. The room erupted in stunned reactions. Craig Ellison rose to his feet, demanding to see the emails more clearly. Meera Patel was already on her phone, presumably contacting their legal team. Nathan remained frozen, his expression shifting between disbelief and dawning horror as he realized the extent of what was happening. This is not an isolated incident, I continued, advancing to the next slide, a timeline showing identical patterns with Meridian Tech, Pinnacle Health, and Quantum Software. Westbrook has systematically undermined campaigns for targeted clients, facilitating their acquisition by larger entities with connections to Westbrook's parent company, Criterion Holdings. As I spoke, Raj entered the room with additional printed evidence packets, distributing them to each Ellison team member. Simultaneously, Vanessa sent the electronic evidence packages to regulatory agencies, financial press, and industry publications, exactly as we had planned. Diane's composure finally cracked. "This is a gross misrepresentation by a disgruntled employee," she said, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Ms. Harlow was recently disciplined for unprofessional conduct and is clearly retaliating with fabricated—" "The evidence is neither fabricated nor presented solely by me," I interrupted, gesturing to Raj and Vanessa, who now stood at the back of the room. 3 separate Westbrook employees independently verified this pattern of deception. And as of 2 minutes ago, this evidence has been provided to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and relevant media outlets. The systematic dismantling of Westbrook's deception continued for another 20 minutes, as I methodically presented document after document, email after email, analysis after analysis, each building an irrefutable case for deliberate market manipulation and client deception. Throughout my presentation, I maintained the same professional demeanor I would have used for any client analysis. No raised voice, no emotional language, no personal accusations, just clear, factual information delivered with precision and authority. The impact was all the more devastating for this clinical approach. Had I launched into an emotional tirade about personal grievances, Diane might have successfully framed it as the revenge tactics of a disgruntled employee. Instead, the methodical presentation of evidence, supported by 2 respected colleagues, carried the unmistakable weight of truth. By the time I concluded, the conference room had transformed from a standard client presentation to the epicenter of a corporate earthquake. Ellison executives huddled together, examining the evidence packets with shocked expressions. Westbrook, team members not involved in the deception, looked shell-shocked, their professional worlds upended in the span of 30 minutes. Diane had gone completely silent, her normally commanding presence diminished by the weight of exposed lies. Nathan alternated between desperate attempts to contact Westbrook's legal team and plaintive looks in my direction, as if seeking some explanation for my betrayal, oblivious to the irony of his expectation of loyalty. Craig Ellison was the first to break the stunned silence that followed my presentation. "I want our legal team here immediately," he said to his assistant. Then, turning to Diane, "If what's presented here is accurate, and given the documentation, I have little reason to doubt it, Westbrook Media has committed not just a breach of contract, but potentially criminal fraud." Diane attempted to regain control, her voice taking on the soothing tone she reserved for client crises. "Craig, I understand this is disturbing information. I assure you I knew nothing about any data manipulation. If Nathan or others on the team have taken inappropriate actions, Westbrook will investigate fully and make appropriate— Save it, Diane, Meera Patel interrupted, holding up printouts of emails that clearly showed Diane's direction of the entire scheme. Your name is all over this. Today's meeting isn't about damage control. It's about how much we'll seek in damages. As security personnel arrived, summoned by someone, though it wasn't clear who, I made eye contact with Raj and Vanessa. With slight nods, we confirmed our next steps. We had anticipated being asked to leave the premises immediately, and had prepared accordingly, bringing nothing to the presentation that we couldn't afford to leave behind. The head of security approached me directly. Ms. Harlow, I've been instructed to escort you from the building. Of course, I replied calmly, disconnecting my laptop and gathering my belongings. Our legal counsel is expecting us at their offices. They've already received copies of everything presented here today. As we were led toward the elevator, I caught a final glimpse of the conference room. Ellison executives on phones with their legal team, Westbrook employees in various states of shock and confusion, and Diane Westbrook standing utterly still in the center of the chaos, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. The turning point was complete. What had begun with a coffee spill and public humiliation had culminated in the exposure of corporate fraud on a scale none of us had initially imagined. There would be no returning to business as usual. For Westbrook Media, for the clients, affected by their deception, or for the three of us who had chosen to stand for integrity at significant personal cost. As the elevator doors closed, separating us from the unfolding chaos, Vanessa spoke softly. Well, that happened. The simple understatement broke the tension. Raj let out a nervous laugh, and I felt the ghost of a smile cross my face for the first time that day. Yes, I agreed as we descended toward an uncertain future. It certainly did. The sleek offices of Thornton and Rivera occupied the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise, their reception area a study in understated legal power, leather seating, muted artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. The three of us sat side by side, still processing the seismic event we had just initiated, as we waited for Michael Rivera to finish his current call. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since we left Westbrook. Colleagues, industry contacts, and unknown numbers all vying for information, explanation, or simply confirmation that what they were hearing was true. I had silenced it after the third call, following our attorney's advice to make no statements until we had thoroughly reviewed our legal position. How long do you think before the story breaks publicly? Raj asked, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Vanessa checked her watch. Given the outlets we contacted, within the hour for industry publications, financial news by market close, mainstream coverage by evening if the SEC acknowledges receipt of the evidence. The gravity of what we had set in motion hung in the air between us. Whistleblowing on this scale, exposing systematic fraud at one of the industry's most prestigious agencies, would send shockwaves through marketing and finance circles alike. The consequences would extend far beyond our individual careers or even Westbrook itself. Ms. Harlow, a voice called, breaking through my thoughts. Michael Rivera stood in the doorway to the conference room, his expression unreadable. If you three would join me, we have matters to discuss. The conference room was already occupied by two additional attorneys from the firm, laptops open and legal pads ready. The gravity of our situation was reflected in the assembled legal firepower. 3 partners for 3 whistleblowers suggested they anticipated significant blowback. I've reviewed the evidence packages you sent over yesterday, Rivera began, without preamble. Legally speaking, you've positioned yourselves well under federal whistleblower protections. The securities fraud angle, in particular, provides substantial coverage against retaliation. But? I asked, sensing the unspoken reservation. But Westbrook and Criterion won't go down without a fight. Their legal team is already mobilizing. Received notice of a temporary restraining order filing regarding disclosure of confidential business information. It won't hold up given the fraud evidence, but it's just the first volley. What should we expect? Vanessa asked, her natural pragmatism asserting itself. Rivera nodded to one of his colleagues, who slid documents across the table to each of us. These are cease and desist letters delivered to our office approximately 20 minutes ago. They allege breach of confidentiality agreements, corporate espionage, defamation, and tortious interference with business relationships. Raj paled visibly. That sounds serious. It's standard intimidation tactics, Rivera's colleague explained. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Their real concern is the securities fraud evidence, which they conspicuously don't mention in these letters. Rivera continued. The standard playbook for corporations in this situation is threefold: legally intimidate the whistleblowers, publicly discredit their character and motivations, and internally contain the damage by scapegoating specific individuals. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I glanced down to see the headline: Westbrook Media announces immediate termination of Nathan Palmer for unauthorized actions in client management. They're throwing Nathan under the bus, I said, showing the others my phone. Exactly as you predicted. Rivera nodded grimly. Phase 1 of damage control. By tomorrow, they'll construct a narrative that isolates the fraud to Palmer's team while positioning Diane and other executives as shocked discoverers of his deception. But the evidence clearly shows Diane's direction, Vanessa protested. Her email explicitly ordered the data manipulation. Which is why the SEC investigation will eventually reach her, Rivera assured us. But corporations like Criterion play a long game. They'll sacrifice middle management immediately to buy time and distance for the executives. The conference room door opened as Rivera's assistant entered with a tablet. You'll want to see this, she said, placing it before him. Just released by Westbrook PR. Rivera scanned the screen, his expression darkening. As expected, they're moving to phase 2, character assassination. He turned the tablet to face us. The screen displayed an official Westbrook Media statement. Westbrook Media has terminated 3 employees who conspired to present falsified information to clients in an apparent retaliatory action following standard disciplinary procedures. Emma Harlow, terminated last week for inappropriate conduct at a client event, enlisted 2 colleagues in this vindictive campaign. Westbrook is cooperating with clients to correct any misinformation presented during today's unauthorized presentation. The statement was so brazenly false it momentarily took my breath away. The assertion that I had been terminated prior to today, a complete fabrication designed to frame our whistleblowing as revenge for dismissal rather than exposure of fraud. They're rewriting history, I said, the reality of what we were facing, settling into my bones. Positioning me as disgruntled and fired rather than as a whistleblower. Standard procedure, Rivera confirmed. They need to undermine your credibility before the full evidence reaches public consciousness, which brings us to our next steps. For the next hour, we mapped out a strategic response with the legal team. We would make no public statements. Today, allowing the evidence to speak for itself through the regulatory investigations. We would cooperate fully with the SEC and FTC, positioning ourselves as witnesses to systemic fraud, rather than as crusaders against Westbrook specifically. As we wrapped up the legal strategy session, Rivera's assistant entered again. There's a call for Ms. Harlow. Craig Ellison is online too. The unexpected contact from Ellison's CEO surprised everyone in the room. Rivera raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Let's take this on speaker with legal present. I agreed, and the call was transferred to the conference room system. Ms. Harlow. Craig Ellison's voice filled the room, his tone carefully neutral. I appreciate you taking my call. Of course, Mr. Ellison. I have my legal counsel present, and you're on speaker. Understood. I'll be brief. Our team has spent the afternoon reviewing the evidence you presented. Our legal department confirms its authenticity based on our own internal records of communication with Westbrook." He paused, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I want to be clear about something. While we are pursuing appropriate legal remedies against Westbrook Media and will cooperate with regulatory investigations, I personally want to thank you for bringing this to light. The simple expression of gratitude, so unexpected in the midst of corporate chaos, momentarily left me without words. You risked your career to prevent my company from being manipulated into a disadvantageous merger," he continued. "That took courage and integrity. Whatever allegations Westbrook makes about your motivations, Ellison recognizes the service you've provided." "Thank you," I said finally. But it wasn't just me. Raj and Vanessa were essential to uncovering the full scope of the fraud. "I've spoken with Ms. Kim already," he replied. "And I'll be reaching out to Mr. Mehta next, which brings me to the secondary purpose of my call. When the dust settles from this situation, I'd like to discuss potential opportunities at Ellison for professionals with your ethical standards and analytical skills." After the call concluded, Rivera looked genuinely impressed. That rarely happens. Usually clients caught in corporate fraud situations distance themselves from whistleblowers, even when they've benefited from the disclosure. Craig Ellison built his company from the ground up, Vanessa noted. He has a reputation for valuing integrity. Still, it's a significant gesture given the circumstances. As we left the law offices with plans to reconvene the following morning, the city had taken on a dreamlike quality. The same streets, the same buildings, the same flow of traffic, yet everything had fundamentally changed. By now, the news would be spreading through industry channels, professional networks, social media. Westbrook employees would be updating resumes, clients would be reviewing contracts, competitors would be circling. "What now?" Raj asked as we stood on the sidewalk outside the building. The simple question encompassed so much: the immediate future, the next day, the longer-term consequences of our actions. "Now we go home," Vanessa said pragmatically. "We rest. We prepare for tomorrow's meetings with regulatory investigators. We let the evidence work through proper channels. And we don't read the comment sections," I added, attempting lightness despite the weight of the day. Rivera was clear about staying off social media and news sites. We parted ways with promises to check in by phone later, each heading to our respective homes to process the day's events privately. The walk to my apartment gave me time to absorb the immediate consequences of our actions. By now, former colleagues would be choosing sides, constructing narratives, positioning themselves relative to the unfolding scandal. Some would distance themselves completely. Some would claim they always had suspicions. Some would genuinely struggle to reconcile the Westbrook they thought they knew with the reality we had exposed. My apartment felt like a sanctuary when I finally closed the door behind me, a space untouched by the corporate earthquake we had triggered. I kicked off my shoes, changed into comfortable clothes, and finally allowed myself to exhale fully, for what felt like the first time since that fateful gala. My phone, which I had silenced hours ago, showed 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages when I finally checked it. Most were from industry contacts and former colleagues. Several were from journalists seeking comments. One was from Nathan, a single text sent just 30 minutes ago. Why? The simplicity of his question reflected either genuine bewilderment or calculated performance. Either way, I had no intention of engaging. Nathan had made his choices, long before I made mine. Instead, I scrolled to find the message from Tessa, my friend from the competing agency. "Holy shit, E. Just saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I'm here." This gesture of uncomplicated support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. In the professional chaos, it was easy to forget that we existed beyond our work identities, that we had friends and connections. unrelated to corporate positioning or industry status. I texted back, "I'm okay, it's been a day. Could use normal friend conversation that doesn't involve the words whistleblower or securities fraud." Her response came immediately. "Coming. Over with takeout and zero shop talk. ETA 30 minutes. As I waited for my friend to arrive, I allowed myself to fully process the consequences of the day's events. Professionally, the immediate future was uncertain. Whistleblower protections would shield us from direct retaliation, but the reality of industry blacklisting remained a possibility. The Ellison opportunity was encouraging but not guaranteed. Personally, the consequences felt more immediately positive. The relief of no longer participating in deception, of standing firmly in my values regardless of cost. These were substantial gains that outweighed the professional uncertainty. The most significant consequence, however, was internal. The fundamental shift in how I understood power and agency in professional settings. What began with humiliation at a corporate gala had transformed my understanding of whose validation mattered, whose authority was legitimate, and what success truly meant in a career context. The doorbell rang, announcing Tessa's arrival with promised takeout and friendship untainted by corporate politics. Whatever tomorrow would bring, investigations, legal proceedings, professional recalibration. Tonight would be about reconnecting with the parts of myself that existed beyond any job title or industry affiliation. The immediate consequences of our actions were still unfolding, rippling outward in ways we couldn't fully predict. But in this moment, I felt a profound certainty that we had done the right thing, not just for Ellison or for other potential victims of Westbrook's schemes, but for ourselves and our own integrity. Some consequences couldn't be measured in career advancement or professional reputation. Some were measured in the ability to look at your reflection and recognize the person staring back, someone who, when faced with a critical choice between complicity and courage, had chosen the harder but better path. 6 months had passed since the day we exposed Westbrook Media's fraudulent practices. In that time, the corporate landscape had shifted dramatically, with ripples extending far beyond one agency or one industry. I stood at the window of my new office, gazing out at the city skyline from a different perspective, both literally and figuratively. The Ellison headquarters occupied a more modest building than Westbrook's gleaming tower. But the view from the 18th floor still offered a remarkable panorama of the city I had come to see in entirely new ways. The media had dubbed it the Westbrook scandal in the weeks following our disclosure. Financial publications ran detailed analyses of the securities fraud implications. Industry journals published exposés on ethical breaches in agency-client relationships. Mainstream news covered the dramatic fall of Diane Westbrook and the corporate empire she had built. The consequences had unfolded in predictable waves. First came the immediate corporate damage control. Nathan fired, press releases, positioning him as a rogue actor, legal threats against the 3 whistleblowers. Then came the regulatory response, SEC and FTC investigations, freezing of certain Criterion Holdings assets, subpoenas for electronic records and communications. The third wave brought the industry fallout. Clients fled Westbrook en masse. Employees updated LinkedIn profiles and resumed job searches. Competitors simultaneously distanced themselves from similar practices while eagerly absorbing displaced talent and accounts. But it was the fourth wave that proved most significant. The structural reforms that emerged as the full scope of the fraud became clear. New industry guidelines for agency-client transparency. Enhanced regulatory oversight of marketing performance. Metrics. Whistleblower protection provisions added to standard agency contracts. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Monthly Ethics Committee, 2 p.m., Conference Room C. The notification brought a smile, not because Ethics Committee meetings were particularly enjoyable, but because of what its existence represented. Craig Ellison had been true to his word. 3 weeks after the exposure, once the initial legal chaos had settled somewhat, He had invited the three of us to discuss positions at Ellison Digital. Vanessa now headed a newly created financial transparency division, ensuring that client resources were allocated exactly as promised. Raj led a team focused on ethical, creative practices, developing the industry's first independent audit system for campaign performance reporting. And I had found my place as Director of Analytics and Integrity, a position created specifically to bridge the gap between data-driven marketing decisions and ethical business practices. My team developed verification systems to ensure that campaign metrics reflected reality rather than convenient narratives. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. Meera Patel, now Ellison's COO, leaned against the doorframe. "Ready for the ethics committee?" she asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "I hear the agenda includes a lively debate about transparency thresholds for demographic targeting." "Can't wait," I replied, gathering my tablet and notes. Though I suspect it won't top last month's heated discussion about disclosure requirements for AI-generated content. We walked together toward the conference room, our conversation shifting to the latest industry developments. The Westbrook scandal had triggered a cascade of similar exposures across multiple agencies. What we had uncovered was not an isolated incident, but indicative of wider industry practices that had gone unchallenged for too long. "Did you see the settlement announcement?" Meera asked as we approached the conference room. I nodded. That morning, news had broken that Criterion Holdings had reached a $142 million settlement with regulatory agencies over the securities fraud allegations. "To 6 months of corporate rehabilitation," Vanessa proposed, raising her glass in a toast. "And to never having to manipulate another performance metric," Raj added, his expression lighter than I'd ever seen during our Westbrook days. "To coffee stains," I said, earning curious looks from my companions. Sometimes the worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be. As we settled into conversation about projects, colleagues, and industry gossip, a notification lit up all three of our phones simultaneously. Breaking news. Brightline Digital, the company at the center of the planned Ellison acquisition, was being investigated for similar fraudulent practices across multiple client accounts. "The domino effect continues," Vanessa observed, scanning the article. "Their stock is already down 17% in after-hours trading. Makes you wonder how many other agencies are rushing to clean house before they're exposed," Raj added. The revelation confirmed what we had suspected, that the problem extended far beyond Westbrook, representing an industry culture that had normalized deception and manipulation. The work of reform was far from complete, but each exposure created momentum for meaningful change. Later that evening, as I walked home through lamplit streets, I passed a familiar building, the Hamilton Hotel, site of the executive breakfast that had preceded our whistleblowing action. The memory of that morning no longer carried the sting of anxiety or the weight of imminent risk. Instead, it felt like a pivotal scene in a story that had ultimately resolved toward justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Industry Ethics Summit? Look at you, changing the world one PowerPoint at a time. Drinks this weekend to celebrate?" I smiled, typing back an affirmative response. The network of relationships that sustained me now extended beyond any single workplace, comprising people who valued integrity over institutional loyalty. At home, I noticed the calendar on my kitchen wall, a simple paper one I still preferred to digital alternatives. The date circled. In red was exactly 6 months from the night of the Westbrook Gala. 6 months since a coffee spill and public humiliation had set in motion events that transformed not just my career, but an entire industry's approach to ethical practices. I had marked the date weeks ago, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as an opportunity to reflect on the journey since then. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge both the costs and benefits of the path I had chosen. The costs were real. Months of legal meetings, deposition preparations, hostile questioning by Westbrook attorneys, financial uncertainty during the transition period. The stress had manifested physically at times. Tension headaches, disrupted sleep, weight fluctuation. The career I had envisioned at Westbrook had indeed ended, though not in the way I once feared. But the benefits far outweighed these costs. Professional autonomy built on competence rather than compliance. Colleagues who valued ethical standards over expediency. Work that aligned with core values rather than compromising them. And perhaps, most significantly, the internal peace that came from knowing I had chosen integrity when it would have been easier to remain silent. The final piece of mail in my stack was a thick envelope from Michael Rivera's law firm. Inside, I found documents indicating that the whistleblower award from the SEC settlement had been processed. The amount was substantial, enough to provide long-term financial security, regardless of future career developments. The irony wasn't lost on me. What had begun as public humiliation had culminated in both professional advancement and financial reward. But neither of these outcomes had motivated our decision to expose Westbrook's fraud. The driving force had been much simpler. The conviction that truth mattered, that clients deserved honest partners, that professional success built on deception wasn't success at all. I placed the documents aside and moved to my balcony, watching as the city transitioned from day to evening. Lights flickered on in office buildings and apartments, each representing lives and stories I would never know. Somewhere in one of those buildings, another professional might be facing their own ethical crossroads, weighing compliance against conviction, security against integrity. I hoped they would choose courage. I hoped they would discover, as I had, that standing for principles, even at personal cost, ultimately leads to a more authentic form of success than any achieved through compromise or deception. The coffee stain on my dress had long since been cleaned, the garment donated months ago. But its impact remained, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as evidence that moments of greatest challenge often precede moments of greatest growth. As night settled over the city, I reflected on the journey from assistant to whistleblower to industry advocate. The path had not been direct or easy, but it had led to a life and career aligned with my deepest values, one where power derived, not from position or title, but from the courage to stand for truth, regardless of consequence. What had begun as one woman's humiliation had catalyzed meaningful change across an entire industry. The true revenge, it turned out, wasn't in Diane's downfall or Westbrook's collapse. It was in the creation of something better from the ruins of what they had destroyed. And that was a victory no one could ever take away. The fine represented one of the largest penalties ever imposed for marketing-related financial manipulation. Diane took the fall, I noted. No jail time, but a lifetime ban from officer or director positions in publicly traded companies. Better than she deserved, Mira replied, her expression hardening momentarily. Though I suppose losing the empire she built is its own kind of punishment. The latest industry gossip suggested Diane had relocated to Europe, living off wealth that, while diminished by legal settlements, remained substantial. Nathan had reportedly landed at a small agency in another state, his once meteoric career, trajectory permanently altered by his association with the scandal. Various other Westbrook executives had scattered to consulting roles or early retirement, depending on their demonstrable involvement in the fraudulent practices. The ethics committee meeting proceeded much as expected, detailed discussions of policy minutiae that, while seemingly tedious, represented genuine efforts to establish guardrails against future abuses. I contributed what I could, drawing on both my analytical expertise and my first-hand experience with how data could be manipulated to serve hidden agendas. As the meeting concluded, Craig Ellison made a rare appearance. The founder typically allowed his management team to handle day-to-day operations, focusing his attention on long-term strategy and industry relationships. "Emma," he said, approaching after most committee members had departed, Do you have a moment? We walked to his office, a comfortably appointed space that reflected his practical approach to business. Well furnished, but without ostentatious displays of status or wealth. I've been approached about speaking at next month's Industry Ethics Summit, he explained, settling into a chair opposite mine rather than behind his imposing desk. Given everything that's happened, they're particularly interested in our transparency initiatives. I'd like you to present alongside me. The request carried significant weight. The annual summit attracted CMOs and agency heads from across the country. Having a platform to discuss the systemic changes implemented at Ellison would amplify the impact of our work beyond one company. I'd be honored, I replied, though I assume my background will make for some uncomfortable moments in the audience. He smiled, the expression reflecting genuine appreciation rather than corporate politeness. That's precisely why you're the right person. You've lived both sides of this industry, the problematic systems and the reformed approach. Your perspective carries unique authority. As I left his office with details for the summit preparation, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 6 months earlier, I had stood humiliated in a hotel ballroom, coffee staining my dress, my professional value dismissed by a powerful executive and my supposed mentor. Now I was preparing to address industry leaders about ethical practices and systemic reform. The transformation extended beyond professional status. The Emma who had entered Westbrook Media nearly 2 years ago had been eager to please, seeking validation from authority figures like Nathan and Diane. She had accepted hierarchies as given, power dynamics as immutable. She had calibrated her worth according to others' assessments. That version of myself seemed almost unrecognizable now. Not because the core values had changed, but because those values now found expression through confidence rather than compliance, through leading change rather than seeking approval. After work, I met Raj and Vanessa at our usual spot, a rooftop bar overlooking the park, far removed from the sleek lounges favored by agency executives. It had become our monthly tradition to gather here, maintaining the bond forged through shared risk and ethical commitment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.